Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. On episode 346, we're talking about wet wading, specifically gear that is going to make your wet wading more comfortable, more safe, and more enjoyable. Before we get to that, let's define what wet wading is, because I don't want to assume anything of anyone. Wet wading is not when you are wading and you fall in and you inadvertently get wet. I suppose you are at that point wading wet, but you're not wet wading. What we're talking about here is purposefully choosing to not use any sort of apparatus like waders or any other waterproof gear to stay dry while you are fishing and while you are in the water. The reasons why you do this is because it's great to do it. It's comfortable in circumstances where the water temperature is warm enough and the air temperature is warm enough, particularly in the summer months. You find yourself doing this a lot, both for warm water species and for trout. It gives you a lot of flexibility. And personally, I will wet wade in those seasons anytime where the conditions are right and I'm not going to need to be in dry clothes right away after I'm done fishing. So if I'm fishing somewhere where I'm going to go out to dinner right away, it's easier for me to throw on waders than it is to completely change my clothes. But I like to wet wade because it's just fun to get in the water, to be completely honest. So we're talking about equipment and gear. Now, I will say that if you go back like 4 years, there was an episode on summer fly fishing clothing. I think it's called like Summer Fly Fishing Head to Toe. I think I've done every season now on the podcast of head to toe fly fishing clothing. And so there are some aspects of this topic that were covered back then, but that's talking specifically about clothing. But today we're going to talk about wet wading clothing. And so there is some overlap, but we'll start with, I would say, the most important thing, and that is footwear. Now, earlier this week, and I'll mention this at the end of the podcast, I wrote an article about some footwear options that you have. So I'm going to run through that again here and kind of riff on some of those concepts. I'll start with the most expensive and then kind of get down to the least expensive and then give you my opinion on them. But they all work. Some are work better than others, and I'll actually give you my opinion on each option and what I think is the best. But again, don't feel like you have to go spend a lot of money to do this. In fact, that's one of the reasons why folks like doing this, is because you don't need to spend a lot of money to wet wade. You don't actually need to add equipment to your arsenal if you don't want to. But the easiest one for somebody who's already fly fishing is you take your regular wading boot, assuming that you have stocking foot waders, so waders that terminate in a neoprene booty. Those wading boots that you have bought to go with those waders, you wear those. Now, you can just throw those on your feet and tie them up tight, but there's a good chance they're not going to fit super great because they are fit to you having a neoprene booty on when you put your foot in them and probably a thicker sock. So there's a couple things that I like to do. One of them is to buy a neoprene sock and also to have a good pair of socks that I can wear underneath. Now, it's really, really vital. I mean, that maybe is hyperbolic language, but for these to be wool socks. Cotton socks are going to be disgusting after doing this for a while, and even polyester socks are not going to be super comfortable. A nice pair of wool socks that they're going to get wet, but your feet are going to be wet anyway. It's nice to have that cushion and not to have your feet rubbing against neoprene, or certainly not to have your feet rubbing against the inside of a wading boot, which are not designed for your foot. The pressure points in your foot to be rubbing up against anything. A lot of times they're like canvas on the inside, or even just other exposed kind of harder materials. If you have a wool sock and then a neoprene sock, you're getting all the benefits of the support, the stability, and everything else that comes with a wading boot that you already have, and it's going to be a great option. Now, the drawback is that a lot of times people enjoy the benefit of moving a little bit lighter and a little more easy when they're wet wading. You're not going to have that with a big clunky boot. It's a little bit, you kind of look like a anime character with his giant shoe and then your calves sticking out of it. But it works. It works great. I did this for the longest period of time. The most of my fly fishing wet wading history, I was doing this precise thing. The next step down, and this is actually my preferred method, what I would choose to do and what I do choose to do, and that is to buy a shoe that is specifically designed for wet wading. So one of the benefits of using a wading boot is that sole, no matter what kind of sole you use, whether it be rubber or studs or felt or whatever, that is going to give you phenomenal traction. Now, there are shoes that are designed with that same thing in mind, and they come from a number of different locations. Some of them them come from the fly fishing section. They are specifically designed by the major fly fishing brands to be a lightweight shoe. It looks like a sneaker, or like a low top boot that you can wear wading. And some of them have a neoprene cuff to keep debris out of your foot. But again, they are designed to be worn without socks, but you can wear them with socks. And if you're going to be walking a lot, I would actually recommend a wool sock for that as well. But you don't have to just go to the fly fishing section. In fact, I don't own a pair of wading shoes that is produced by a fly fishing company. I own some kayaking and paddling companies' shoes that they make for effectively the same purpose. These are shoes that are built with phenomenal sticky rubber soles, as well as a footbed that is designed not only for comfort, but also for moving a lot across wet surfaces, giving you that sort of stability. And one of the great things about ones that are coming from paddling companies and other things like that, they're either designed for trail running or for like carrying a canoe while wearing the shoe in the water. They're going to give you the stability that you need. These are my preferred footwear choices when I am in a wet wading situation. I've been fishing out of wet wading and fishing out of kayaking shoes for probably the last 8 years or so. And I absolutely love them. You can move quickly and you can move efficiently while you are wearing them. The next step down, I did this for a couple of years, but I just am not a huge fan of it, is wading in sandals, wet wading in sandals. This is great because they dry off quickly, they drain easily, but you don't get that toe and ankle support. I know some brands have like a big toe cup on the top. You just don't get that same sort of protection. I've too many times been standing on a rock, slid sideways, and hit either the top of my foot or the outside of my ankle or the inside of my ankle or the heel or my toe on a rock, and just really caused a bad day, broken a toenail or something like that. It's just not pleasant. That said, if the surface of the stream bed that you're wading on is a little bit more gentle, whether it be sand or even mud or kind of a consistent sized smaller gravel, then this wouldn't be a problem at all. So if that's where you fish and this is something you already have a pair of Chacos or Tivas or whatever, then go for it. It's going to be great because a lot of times these also have soles that are designed for some wet surfaces. And then last choice, in my opinion, and I'm not just being disparaging if this is how you like to do it, is just to use an old pair of tennis shoes. I've done it a few times when I'm in a situation where I don't have anything else on me. I decide to wet wade, and I didn't bring the appropriate gear. Now, you're not going to have great traction, and you're also not going to have a piece of footwear that dries out anytime quickly. That's one of the huge benefits of the sandals, of the wet wading shoes, and the wading boots. They're going to dry out sometime in the next 24 hours. Your old tennis shoes, are not going to do that. That said, if it works for you, if that doesn't bother you to have a pair of, moldering shoes for a season, I'm not going to be bothered by it. As long as you don't put them in my car, I'm okay. So that's the first and most important thing. But I just want to revisit the fact that a nice pair of wool socks that is going to cover whatever is being touched by your shoe is a really great thing to have. So if I am not walking around a lot while I'm wet wading, if I'm wearing a pair of wading boots or a pair of wading shoes, then I am going to just kind of go barefoot inside of the shoe, or if it's a wading boot, the neoprene sock that I have. But if I'm going to be walking a lot longer, or I'm spending a lot of time on my foot, I'm going to make sure I have a wool sock on, and that gives me some cushion. It's going to protect my foot, particularly at those pressure points where my foot is contacting the shoe, and it is going to be wet, but my feet are going to be wet anyway. So giving those cushioning benefits is going to really be helpful as you fish over the course of a day or maybe even multiple days. Just make sure you dry everything off. Pull out that footbed, open up those laces, and then the next day when you throw them on, they're going to be nice and dry. All right, so about half the podcast episode talking about footwear, because that really is one of the biggest questions I've received over the years of doing this. But it's also the most important thing, because that's really where your safety is going to come in. There is a sense of kind of courage and bravery that you'll get when you are wet wading, if you have noticed that, where you feel like you can maybe go places that where you couldn't go when you were in your waders, because if you wipe out when you're wet wading, you're just a little bit more wet. If you wipe out while you are wading in waders, then you have a really, really bad day in your hands. So you really want to make sure that you have footwear that's going to support you where you go when you are wet wading, because you probably are going to go a little bit deeper than you would normally go, and maybe do some things that they're not unsafe as long as you know how to swim and you know your limitations. But it's you want your footwear to support you. You don't want that to be the limiting factor in how you fish and where you fish, especially if you're also walking for a prolonged distance. All right, now moving on up. I'm a big fan of comfort when I'm fishing, not just for that day, because I think you cast better. I think you pay better attention. I think that ultimately you fish better when you're comfortable. But then also there's the day after that. I don't want to be uncomfortable on the day I come home because I shredded my feet. I mean, it happened to me recently. I just wasn't thinking, and I went too far into the woods, and I kind of had to hurry back, and so I got a bunch of blisters. It just messed up my next couple of days. And so that isn't just your feet. When you're wet wading, if you are in warmer weather and you get wet and you do not have the proper undergarments on, the chafing is going to set in. So how many fly fishing podcasts have you listened to that discuss underwear? Well, that's what we're talking about right now. So I am a big fan of quick dry and wicking undergarments. They make them for men, they make them for women. You can find them at Walmart. You can spend a ton of money at an outdoor store to buy some nice ones. I think some of the best ones that I've worn are designed by like athletic companies. I mean, something as simple as Under Armour, but certainly all the companies that like REI will carry, because they are designed for movement while wet. People run marathons in downpours, and there's gear that is built for that. And so don't feel like what you're buying is over designed or over engineered, because you want that comfort. It is worth spending an extra $5, $10, $15, $20 on a pair of quality undergarments that you will wear, when you go wet wading, however many times a year you do that, to avoid getting chafed and also avoid sitting in wet underwear and pants after you're done fishing or as you're walking back to your car. And so that's another consideration is if you fish somewhere where there's leeches, a lot of times these performance undergarments are going to be compression style, which is going to limit the leech's abilities to find your most sensitive areas. So these are simple things, and it might not seem like a big deal, but it doesn't take a lot of work to get the right piece of gear that is going to provide you what you need. So undergarments, men or women, you can find those. And then I like a good pair of shorts. Now, it depends on how I'm fishing and where I'm fishing. There's sometimes where I am wading through nasty brush, and I am wading in kind of, just maybe someplace that there's a lot more debris in the water, and I will wear a pair of quick dry nylon pants. But I usually like to wear shorts. And depending on where I'm fishing and how I'm fishing, that could be anything from a pair of running shorts to a pair of just nylon hiking shorts. A lot of times I like to avoid having pockets, because then I'll put things in my pockets and I will then need to remember to pull things out of my pockets. So pockets are kind of here or there. It doesn't really matter that much. If you plan on only wading ankle deep, then it's great to have pockets. You might be able to get away with carrying all your gear in your pockets at that point. We'll talk about gear storage here in a minute, but just a nice pair of quick dry pants. And another thing that's helpful in this situation is something with some sort of waist control. So whether that be a drawstring or belt loops, because pants, no matter what material they're made out of, are going to change the way they fit as you sweat and as they get wet. And so just throwing on a pair of shorts that doesn't have a drawstring or that doesn't have belt loops, and then as you wade, now all of a sudden you're dealing with your pants falling down. Again, how many podcasts that are in the fly fishing section are talking about your pants falling down this month? Probably not that many, but that's what we do here in Casting Across. So that is pants and underwear. Now, shirt. You might say, okay, well, I know it's important to have kind of waist down is really you dialed in, but waist up is kind of neither here nor there. Well, this is one thing that is really dialed in and focused on wet wading, but something that I like for fly fishing in the summertime and warm weather in general. I like to have a shirt that's going to dry quickly because as that shirt touches your pants, then it is going to absorb that water. We all remember doing the experiment with the celery and the colored water in elementary school to learn about how that works. Well, your shirt's going to do the exact same thing. So recently I wore a really nice, comfortable, long sleeve sun hoodie that is organic cotton, just super soft. But that thing did not dry off until probably 3 hours after my shorts, which were nylon, dried out. And so I had a wet lap for basically the entire drive home. Not super pleasant, not super smart. I chose comfort in the short term rather than comfort in the long term with that shirt choice. But having a nice, quick dry shirt, and then I prefer, again, this isn't so much wet wading, this is more of a summer thing. I prefer long sleeves. I don't like sunscreen. I don't like bug spray. And I think here's where the wet wading aspect comes in. If you are wet wading, you're probably getting more wet, then that sunscreen and that bug spray might come off a little bit easier. So if you are more covered up using a long sleeve shirt and a hood, then you're not going to have to wear that stuff as much as if you were wearing a short sleeve or going in a tank top, I guess, if you wanted to. So that is why I think that's probably the best choice if you're concerned about those things, as you should be. I also recently got a sunburn. Definitely not fun. All right. So the last major thing is gear storage when you're wet wading. You don't want to wear a fanny pack because, like I said, you're gonna want to get in the water if you are fishing, and the water's comfortable. So my preferred gear storage option is a sling pack that allows me to carry my gear high up on my back. A fly fishing vest is gonna get wet. A chest pack, it might be okay, but a lot of them are more oriented like center on your chest rather than high on your chest. If there's an adjustable option, then that's fantastic. But this might just be me, but I'm thinking of some of my best wet wading experiences, and it's off the coast with a striper on as the waves are rushing into me and basically lapping at my chin. My sling pack is basically up on top of my shoulder at this point because I was casting on a rock, and now to fight the fish, I slid down the rock and I'm just standing in the water and the waves are coming over me. This is an awesome experience. You're basically fighting the fish like down at its level. Similarly, in some rivers down in Virginia, I just have some awesome memories of chasing carp and smallmouth and just putting myself into position to make a cast, catching that fish, and then to fight it well. I'm in much deeper water. I'm up like past my navel, like halfway up my chest, and same thing. My gear is up high on my back or up high on my shoulder, and I'm able to fight that fish and be down in the water with it. Now, you might not want to go to those extremes, and that's not always how I fish. I mean, these are some exceptional moments that I can think of, but I like to have that option. And like I said, even I'm wading waist deep, I don't want to worry about my gear kind of dragging and bouncing in the water. So I like a sling pack that I can cinch up and have tight, so it's maybe sitting just below my shoulder blade on my off shoulder. And I think a lot of folks know that I fish out of Vitavu sling packs. They have a pack called the Inversion Sling, which is designed for being higher up on your back. That's the one that I use more often than not. I know there's a lot of other companies that make them. That's my pack of choice for these conditions. Another reason I like this one is that I don't like waterproof packs. I've mentioned that before on the podcast because waterproof is great as long as water is not inside. But once water gets inside, now you have water that can't get out. Waterproof works, of course, both ways. So I suppose that if you are very, very diligent in making sure that waterproof zipper gets closed all the way, then a waterproof pack is great in this situation. I personally don't have the confidence in that kind of waterproof gear where I'm cool with my flies and my leaders and my phone and my keys and everything else being effectively submerged the entire time I'm fishing. Now, again, I don't want to make it sound like every time you're wet wading, you are up to your armpits and everything's gonna be underwater. But if you are waist deep, then or a little bit deeper, then that stuff is going to get wet. So again, that's just my preference. I think that gives you a lot of flexibility. It gives you a lot of options. You don't always have to have it hiked up super high. But in those conditions, when you do want to, effectively go swimming, then you are going to have a little bit more protection for your gear. So there it is. There's my wet wading primer for equipment. I will just reiterate, there is a false sense of security. Like when you are wading in waders, you want to make sure that every step matters, every step counts, that you are not going somewhere where you're going to get in too deep, because there is something in our heads of like, I'm not here to swim, I'm here to fish. And so it's not the same as jumping in a river and assessing the current and how you're going to swim. You're there to fish. And so your brain's not anticipating everything that could happen if you're going to go underwater. When you're wet wading, there is that false sense of security. So that's why I think footwear is so important. And I think that's why it's just, you want to be cognizant of your ability to swim, to navigate the bottom, and all of those things. As I always say, I think it is super important to have a good pair of polarized sunglasses, not so you can necessarily see fish and see structure for the presentation of your fly, but so you can see where you're stepping and where you're walking. Because the joy of wet wading can really go sideways if all of a sudden now you are swimming for your life. Yes, you don't have a pair of waders on to deal with, but if you weren't planning on going swimming, anytime that you are out of your depth is an issue. But again, those are exceptional things to keep in the back of your head. By and large, this is a really fun way to chase fish. It's one of my favorite ways to fish in the summertime, hiking up in the mountains for brook trout and just walking right into the creek, walking out into a river and making nice long casts, and just enjoying feeling that current and all the sunfish around your legs. It's a wonderful thing. So, did I miss something wet wading wise that you would recommend? I mean, part of the joy of wet wading is the minimalism. So there's not a whole lot involved. But if there's something that you like to use when you go wet wading, let me know. Matthew at castingacross.com. Would absolutely love to hear from you. Oh, and speaking of hearing from you, if you have not yet left a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, go ahead and do that. That would be fantastic. I would appreciate it. If you have more direct feedback, let me know. Matthew at castingacross.com. This week on Casting Across, the first article was called Wet Wading Well. It was those 4 footwear options spelled out in a nice, concise manner, as well as a link to a great pair of socks in that article. Wednesday's post was the best collection of trout articles. This is a phenomenal book, in my humble opinion, that I recommended this week on YouTube. Hey, if you are not listening, you're listening right now. If you're not watching my book reviews on YouTube, you should definitely do that, and then and subscribe and check those out, because I think they are a great, even shorter form version of what I do on the podcast. So definitely check that out over at Casting Across. You can get a link on the website. You can get a link on social media. And of course, you can just go to YouTube and put in Casting Across and then go ahead and subscribe. 1 video a week right now. I think I've got 22 book review videos for that last stretch of time. So definitely check those out and let me know what you think. This week's recommendation on the podcast is a video about Dr. Robert Behnke. So his role in fisheries biology and conservation and a historic perspective on kind of what we know about trout is it's at the top of the list here in the United States. He was a teacher at Colorado State University, and they put out a video after his passing about his legacy. So I'm going to put a link to that video on this podcast show notes over at castingacross.com, and it's definitely worth a watch, especially if you're interested in the books that I have recommended over the last few months. I've recommended a few of his. Definitely worth a watch. Please check it out. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing podcast. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast app and then rate the podcast on Spotify and in Apple Podcasts. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.